Good evening, each and every single one of you, and welcome.
Yes, welcome to season 2.
Welcome to season 2.
We did it.
Hello, everybody. This is your friend Pastor Sergio Chaeta and your co-host Carol.
Oh, Chaeta, good to see you guys.
I see Carla has joined us and Pastor Diego. And we are here with the West Houston crew.
That's right, represent.
Good evening. It is Wednesday, October 4th, and we're excited because we are jumping into a new season. In October, we're going to be talking about mental health.
That's right. Very important topic.
Very important topic. And the reason why we chose mental health is because October, it is Mental Health Awareness Month.
That's right.
So we've chosen 4 topics. Today, we're going to be talking about ADD and ADHD in children and in teens. And we are going to introduce our guest here very shortly. But how did you enjoy season 1?
Man, season 1 was so exciting. It was so unreal. Just being able to share about the passion that so many educators talking about the Adventist education system that we have, and I learned so much. I don't know about you, but we have amazing educators, amazing administration and schools and staff that just make everything come together on a daily basis.
We do. We met a few people.
That's
we
right.
had and I think it was God-led. I think that
absolutely.
The testimonies
That's right.
were absolutely God-led, and I believe that the Lord is going to do the same thing in this new season.
That's right.
So today we have a special guest.
Yes, we do.
Would you like to?
Of course.
Yes, go ahead.
So, and I like to say this is a dear friend who also comes from Adventist education. I just had to make emphasis on that. Nancy Soto is a licensed professional counselor. She is completed her studies at Southern Methodist University, SMU. And she earned her Bachelor's of Science in Psychology as well as a Master's of Science in Counseling with the concentration in marriage and family.
Yeah, buddy, yeah.
Welcome, Miss Nancy. So glad to have you here today.
Hi,
Hello.
Nancy.
Hi. I'm so
Welcome.
excited to be here, guys. Thank you for the invitation.
Of course.
How are you? How's it going?
I'm doing good. It's good to be here.
It is good to have you here. I know that last time we had you, I was finishing my assignment in Austin, Texas. We had our retreat, our annual retreat with my 3 churches. And you came to Lake Whitney with us and you spent the weekend there with us. And it was a blessing. So thank you once again for accepting the invitation today here. Off camera, we were just talking about how you were just putting your kids to bed and how busy your work it is. So we really appreciate it.
Yes.
Thank you. Thank you for the invitation. And I'm happy to be here and share a little bit more knowledge of what I have with ADHD.
Thank you. So tell us a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Like Carol was saying, I'm a licensed professional counselor. I started working in private practice. I actually did my internship and I went to practicum, and I kind of stayed on board in private practice. So that has been like the majority of my experience doing therapy, individual. And then recently I accepted the call rather to go back to one of my, I guess the high school that I graduated from, which is North Dallas Adventist Academy. So I am the school counselor there, and I also am the school counselor for Dallas Christian Academy. So that is kind of like my main job now. And then private practice I do like part-time, kind of like on my free time, besides everything else that I juggle in life.
Wait a minute. So you're telling me that you graduated from this school and you are that you're alumni from, and now you are the school counselor for. That is amazing. I just had to recognize that. Wow.
That is awesome.
That's amazing.
Yes.
So tell us, between, you're both counseling at both academies and owning and having your own practice. The question is, what is it exactly that you do and why do you do it?
Okay. So as a school counselor, I work one-on-one with the students, basically meeting their social, their emotional, and sometimes their academic needs. There's so much need everywhere, especially in schools. And there's been such a shortage in not only educators, but also on the mental health aspect of that, school counselors. So I'm able to kind of provide that support to the students while I'm there. In private practice, I do therapy. It's one-on-one, where I work with individuals. It's a little bit more, I guess the goals are more long-term than it would be in counseling. So there's a lot of overlap there.
Okay.
The job is a little bit similar in some ways, but in other ways, I guess it can be a little bit different. Yeah.
Okay. In the topic, so we're talking about ADD and ADHD in children today. How much of that do you work? Do you do in your current assignment?
Or I
A
would say
lot.
how much you see of
Yeah.
that.
Right.
A lot more common than we might think. It's actually ADHD is actually one of the most common like neurodevelopmental disorders that there are, and one of the biggest obstacles in kids being able to kind of succeed, or not necessarily succeed, but the biggest challenges that they sometimes face within like their academic journey, if you will. So it's a lot more common than we think. I see it often in the school. I also work a lot during therapy. So, for example, for the kids who are recommended through the school to get like an evaluation, and they're coming to me like, oh, I need you to work with my child in order for them to develop like skills that they can use for school. Then I work with them like individually, teaching them like different ways to handle like their impulsivity, or them not being able to concentrate, which are like marked symptoms of ADHD. So yeah, I
Okay.
do see it often.
So, sorry, I was going to
Go
say,
ahead.
before we go a little bit into this topic of ADHD, could you explain to our viewers and us a little bit more of what exactly does this mean
Yeah, of course. So
or what it
ADHD,
stands for?
yes, ADHD stands for Attention Deficit and Hyperactivity Disorder.
Those are
Um,
fancy words.
it is, and it's basically to describe like the major symptoms, which is like the inattention part, the impulsivity, and then the inability to not focus, I guess. And actually, now that you mentioned it, there's a term that has been commonly used, which is also ADD, and that one
Okay.
is attention deficit disorder. It kind of takes away the hyperactivity part, but it's actually an outdated term that we don't really use
Oh,
anymore.
really? Okay.
Yeah. So it kind of falls under the big umbrella of ADHD. But now what we have done is we kind of taken out that term. Everybody kind of falls in the ADHD, but now we categorize into only hyperactivity, or only inattention focus, or a combined type. So
Oh,
now
wow.
we don't use ADD anymore. Mhm.
So let me just give some clarification. If I tell you that I see kids that are jumping up and down, does that automatically put them on that scale? They seem energetic or not necessarily?
No, not
Just
necessarily.
mean, just to be
No.
clear, it doesn't mean because
Yes.
they're hyper. They
Well,
have,
the thing is that oftentimes, like, dude, you have ADHD.
Right.
As soon as, I mean,
They're
if there is
energetic.
like a lack of concentration, or like, oh, look, a squirrel, whatever it is, I guess
there's the confusion, and
there
they're
is
like,
that
"Oh, he has
confusion.
ADD, or she has ADD." I'm just trying to be clear here.
Yes.
Okay,
No.
good to
And
know. Thank you for
I
that.
appreciate your question, because it is sometimes a common misconception. No,
It is.
there's a lot into it. Like there has to be like a formal evaluation to make sure that the child is really struggling, and it has to be like in two different environments. So it has to be like at home but also at school, or at school but also like in extracurricular. At least two of those environments have to like match, if you will, and those symptoms have to present in both, because it could be the case like it's only at home, and if it's not affecting them in school, chances are they might not have ADHD. Kids in general just have a lot of energy, and they need an
Correct.
outlet to kind of like, okay, get rid of a little bit of that energy, or just to get tired. So a lot of it could be, especially like up until like first or second grade, it's hard to actually diagnose a child with ADHD up until that age, because prior to that, it's just normal like development. They're curious, they want to explore. They might seem a little bit more hyper, but it doesn't necessarily mean that they qualify for ADHD.
So what would be an appropriate age if you because I understand sometimes, and it's not sometimes parents are
Yeah.
protective and they know their child better than anyone and but
Right.
what would be appropriate age to if they started to have concerns or most of the time
Mhm.
educators share observations, what would be an appropriate age or
Yeah.
grade to maybe get assessed or evaluated?
Yes. So I would probably say around first grade to
Okay.
maybe first grade, second grade. And the key to remember is not it's not like an age or it's not a grade, but it's like when the child starts to, when they start to like learn the numbers and they start to read and we start to see deficits, like a child should be learning like basic words, but or maybe they're flipping their words a little bit or they're not ready to write by the time they're in sec or third or fourth grade, then that's a concern. And that's when we start to notice,
Mm.
okay, is a child not doing this because they're like we're losing their attention, they get distracted too easily, they're not learning because maybe of other developmental, like other neurodevelopmental disorders or learning disabilities. So I guess around first grade is when we start to introduce them into like their academic work, and when we start to see like something's not right, like they seem to be struggling a lot more than they would have in other grades, then that's when we start to make the recommendations to get them diagnosed or to get evaluated.
Interesting. So, what would you say about an individual who has never probably been tested, maybe didn't even have the resources or never even thought of it, or whatever the case may be, and they get tested later on? Is that a disadvantage, or it is what it is? It happens when it happens.
That's a good question. And the majority, I would say the majority of people who probably have ADHD have been undiagnosed. And that's
Hmm.
pretty common. It happens. And you
Okay.
don't, and I guess there's different levels to like the severity of the
Mm-hmm.
ADHD. So in some people, they might not see a big change. It might not affect them as much as it does to other people. But it helps when you have a diagnosis because things start to kind of make sense. Like, oh, now I remember why I couldn't focus or why I couldn't finish something every time I started.
Ah.
As an adult, you start to see it in different ways. It's not so much like the schoolwork, because if you excelled in school and academic wise, like, great. But then you start to see, like, oh, yeah, I start one thing and I never finish, or I set on to do multiple things and I don't know where to start. I get so overwhelmed and it's like I would rather not do anything, right? So a lot of organizational skills as adults that we start to notice. And it helps because when you know, like, oh, okay, I need to do things different, you can do things different. And it's never too late.
Is ADHD a what's it called, mental condition?
Yeah, it is considered and it is under the umbrella. It's a mental health disorder, but it is
Mental health
considered like
disorder.
it's a neurodevelopmental disorder. And so what that means is, and I don't know if you guys have heard the term neurodivergent. It's not a term that is commonly used or commonly known, but basically what it means is when an individual's brain is just works different, and that's all it means. But those differences can sometimes mean that what we typically think of like in the learning environment as a universal kind of way of teaching or learning is not going to work for every individual. So we have to kind of like accommodate. And neurodivergent just means like your brain is going to work different. So, mhm.
The reason why I ask is because I think that at times we, or parents perhaps, I'll speak for
Or any
myself.
caregiver, right? Whoever
Yeah,
is under.
there is this feeling that we don't want to associate ourselves with a mental disorder because those
Right.
words are strong, right? Like a
Yeah.
mental disorder. I don't want to. I mean, honestly, I don't want to go to a therapist and tell, oh, you have a mental disorder.
Right, right.
So, and perhaps it's a Hispanic thing. I don't know. Or maybe it's an overall taboo. Perhaps a taboo to go to a therapist
Yeah.
and get tested for that kind of thing. Do you see that often?
Yes, absolutely. And I think it's more of like that traditional, like negative stigma that has been associated, where we think of like mental health, we automatically think like that's a bad thing, you know? Like, especially, and you mentioned it, especially within our Hispanic culture. It's not something we really talk about, it's not something we really want to own up, when in reality it's okay, we need the help, you know. Or when we're in respects to ADHD, it doesn't mean that anything is wrong with your child. It just means that his brain works different. And actually, kids who have ADHD are some of the smartest individuals that you can think of,
Wow.
because they're able, because their attention span can sometimes be a little bit smaller than other kids. They're able to do multiple things at once, and they're able to like hyper focus. Like they some of these kids, like, you just need to hear one time and they remember that if it's something interesting for them.
I
So
like how you put it. You know, the different title of it. Your mind just works different. Your brain just
mhm,
works different.
yeah.
And I think that, and perhaps this leads to the following question, and that is, you know, parents or even ourselves, we are accustomed to dealing with people in a certain way,
Mhm,
right? And whenever, you know, and we call that, you know, quote unquote normal, with I don't think there's such thing, but we are accustomed to dealing with people in a certain way. But when we have to deal with people who have a mental disorder, you know, or their brain works differently, then it's tough. So
mhm.
for, you know, what would you say to parents? How can parents help their children with ADHD? What are some of the ways, you know, especially if they don't want to, you know, go through the medication, or when should they consider medication?
Well, actually, before she answers that, I actually wanted to add to that question because, interesting enough, you will get parents' reaction to, I don't even want to get my child evaluated because I'm afraid of getting them on medication. So I would like to get some clarity on that. Is that always the case? Is that always the solution, or are there other options? And also, I would like to add to that what you were saying earlier about when you are maybe not the best at, you know, being able to stay focused in any situation. But you mentioned that they're very bright, right? A lot of these kids are very
Mhm.
bright. And I think I see that as an educator. And I don't know, I mean, I'm not, you know, a specialist in this area, but I noticed that the students that tend to be very hyper or have a lot of energy or can't focus as easy, they perform very high on tests, but
Mhm.
they struggle with organization skills.
Yes, yes. And I guess before I even get into that, I think it's worth clarifying this, which you briefly mentioned, Sergio. When we think about like a mental health disorder, like the name automatically like just makes us nervous, and it automatically makes us think like, oh, that's a negative thing. So
Right.
when we think, but you wouldn't walk around saying, "Oh, that person has heart disease," or like we don't see that person as like the condition that they have. But somehow, when it's mental health, we do, and so we even
That's
go into
interesting.
lengths of saying, "Oh, that's an autistic child," when really, like, no, the child has autism does not define the child. So it's really important for us to kind of take note of that, and like for parents, I would say like the moment like you start to notice something is off, like don't be afraid, because it's not, it shouldn't affect the child so much that that's the only thing that's going to define your child, or if in this case it's you, like it doesn't define you. Just in the same way, like if somebody's going through depression, or somebody has anxiety, somebody has heart disease, somebody has cancer, like we wouldn't immediately associate that person with that. It's, oh, that person has a condition, right? Or this person is different in the way that they think, or in the way that they are able or not able to organize themselves. So it's I would just wanted to mention that really quick. Going back to your question, Carol, no, medication is not the first thing that a specialist will actually recommend. Because one, a lot of it is behavioral. We want to make sure that these kids learn like skills that they're able to use. Medication helps in order for them to focus in the school environment. But even then, I personally do not recommend, and I can tell you most doctors will actually not recommend medication first.
Oh,
The first
wow.
thing that the first thing that they will try to do after they assess a child is kind of go through the different symptoms and say, this is how you can help at home. Can you guys make these changes? These are the way that the teacher can help at home. And that's when we talk about making accommodation plans at school, the IEP plans, the 504 plans. And those are individualized education plans for kids who have who struggle sitting for long periods of time. So what they actually recommend in the school is, taking frequent breaks. If they need to take a test, like, okay, They're able to get up, they're able to kind of stretch, they're able to kind of have fidget toys, or if they need to, any other type of accommodation, that all falls under the behavioral plan. Even at home, parents, are able to do various things in order to teach their kids like how to handle or how to manage all those symptoms of ADHD. When we start to see the kids really struggle in school, and like we're doing everything we can with the behavioral plan, doesn't seem to kind of be giving that child the extra push that they need. They're failing classes. Now they're talking about, holding the child back. Then the recommendation is made, well, maybe medication can actually help the child to kind of in the short term, to kind of be able to focus, to control their impulsivity, and stuff like that. But it is not the first thing that
It's
comes to
not the
mind.
first, and maybe more like a reserved, like last resort, really
Right.
not what you want to really give
Exactly.
them
Yes.
necessarily. Okay,
Yeah.
that's good to know, because the stigma out there is that there's a fear, there's a fear
Mm-hmm.
out there, and I see it, I hear it, and so it's good to know that it's not the first thing medical doctors will go necessarily towards. But
Right.
let's say that we are in that situation as last resort, and the parent doesn't want to go that route. Is that
Mm-hmm.
still a solution? Like, you don't have to go that route. That may be a recommendation. That might be the where we're at. But can there still be other ways to go about it, even if that's a recommendation of being medicated?
Yes, absolutely. And a lot of parents actually opt to not have medication involved at all, just because of the secondary effects that it does have, especially on a young child who's still developing. So most parents do opt to actually wait until they're a little older, because we are talking about like their stimulants. They do affect like your body. They will affect like the structure, not the structure in your brain, but how your brain is wired. So I guess the
Okay.
common fear there with stimulants is we don't want the child to be dependent on that medication, just like you wouldn't
Mm,
want to be depending on, if for example you have high blood pressure. Like, no adult wants to be dependent on that medication. They're taking it
right.
short term until they can get better. But you can make life changes. You can make
Mm-hmm.
different kinds of changes in order for you to be at a better place, eventually kind of weaning you off from that medication so you no longer need it. So as the child develops, if the parent chooses not to go the medication route, it'll be a lot of behavioral, a lot of therapy in order for them to learn not only to how to handle it at home and at school, but also for the child to learn how to handle, like, when I get distracted, what are some things that kind of bring me back so I'm not getting so distracted I'm not able to do my work, or the impulsivity part. Yeah.
And then you mentioned that I've also heard, is this true? I just want to random facts. You hear
Hmm.
people talk
Yeah.
stuff. Let's clear the air, guys.
Yes, go ahead.
I grew up in a Hispanic home. They say Vicks cures everything. It's like, okay, listen, guys.
Give him NyQuil. Give
I
him
tried
NyQuil.
it. It don't work. I had to pay my medical bill and go to the doctor. So no, it doesn't fix everything. But I've heard that parents that have not gone that route, when they have been recommended the medication, they've actually switched the diet. Is that something you've heard before about playing with the
Yeah.
child's diet? Is that something familiar?
Yes, I've heard it. There's also, and that reminds me of like and I think it's also a common misconception. There's a lot of research behind, like, the more sugar that a child has, the more hyperactive they're going to be, or that we see like a flare in hyperactivity for a child who has ADHD, and that is a common misconception. We all agree sugar is not good for you, but it doesn't actually make them hyper. That's a very common misconception. But
What?
Hold
there
on.
has
Dun, dun,
yeah.
dun.
What?
Reality check.
Let me go
I've been
get
lied
some
to my whole
cookies right
life.
now.
What?
But there is some research. I will say this: there is some research, and there has been like a strong correlation between certain food dyes in the food, especially I think the red colored food dye, that has been linked to more cases of ADHD in children. So.
Interesting.
Mhm.
Okay.
So a lot of parents do opt out to, cut out like like most processed foods and kind of go into a more healthy diet where it includes like more vegetables, more fruit, more, and really, like, I guess we talk a lot about, especially within our Adventist community, like the health
Mm-hmm.
ministry, and how we need to be eating better anyway, right?
Right.
Yeah.
Absolutely.
So in just a few minutes, a couple of minutes, maybe about 5 more minutes, we're going to open it up for our audience online, our YouTubers,
Our followers,
our
our
followers,
viewers.
our viewers online on YouTube and on Facebook to ask questions. So
Yeah.
you may go ahead and put those in the comments. But in the meantime, before we get that, what are some practical ways that parents can do to help their kids with ADHD?
Yes. So ADHD has, I mean, it has several symptoms, but three of the ones that we need to keep in mind is the attention difficulty. And so with the attention difficulty, like we cannot expect a child to sit down for long periods of time, extended periods of time to do a task because inevitably like they're going to get bored. They're going to get distracted. They're going to start thinking about other things that they want to do, especially if that current activity is not the most exciting one, right? So we need to remember that instead of giving them, like, for example, long assignments or having them sit down to do like a focused task over like 30 minutes, an hour, we need to kind of compartmentalize that into shorter periods of time. You can still have a child do the same activity or the same task, but
Interesting.
as opposed to having them sit for 30 minutes or an hour to complete it, let's do it in increments of like 10 minutes, 15 minutes, give them a break, and then we come back and until they get to finish that task. And as parents, I think it's something that we kind of have to keep in the back of our head or our minds because sometimes we need things to get done. They need to pick up their room, they need to do their homework, but we expect them to sit there for long periods of time. And let's be honest, with most kids, if it's not an interesting activity, they're going to get bored anyway, regardless of whether they have ADHD or not,
It's
right?
already hard to entertain them as it is.
Exactly. It is. It
That's
really
true.
is.
Very true.
So if we can cut that back into, okay, let's do 10 minutes and then we'll take a break and then we'll come back. It'll be a lot more successful. You will not find yourself in that power struggle of like, hey, you need to do your homework and like where we get impatient, we get frustrated when they don't do it. Like we got to find ways to kind of accommodate, I guess, to their needs.
Wow.
Okay.
Very good. Love it.
And then, yeah, and then something that I think we know for those of us who are parents, but we kind of need a reminder is, it's we need to have patience and we need to be consistent because the best way to teach a child anything, and Carol, maybe you can agree with me as an educator, is when we nourish when we like build those relationships and we nourish with love and patience, it will go so far. A child will be much more motivated when we say you can do it, I know you have done it before. You're doing great, as opposed to like you're not done. Like this needs to get done right now. Like why is this taking you so long? So we need to kind of keep I guess I keep the vision on that. Be patient. It's taking your child a little bit longer to learn because they don't know yet. They're learning because they're developing, and we need to remember that we shouldn't put so many or place so many expectations on them where they're kind of like this is the first time that they're learning how to do these things.
And I love that we're talking about this, Nancy, because ADHD is a real thing. It is a disorder that is affecting many young people. But
Yeah.
even with that aside, I agree with what you're saying. Whether you're a parent or you're a foster parent or you're a guardian of any child that is under your responsibility, the truth is that when it's on an everyday basis, we get impatient, and sometimes you get to the point where I've said this before, repeating yourself, and advise as an educator that I have applied personally and has helped me. Besides the fact that my kids pray for me, I'm not kidding. My kids will literally say, let's pray for Miss O for her patience. Like, yes, more prayer, more power. But besides that, I would say that if we can truly just remind ourselves that as parents and as anyone who's under, taking care of a child, repetition is like, just tell yourself that that's part of your job. And I promise you won't get annoyed with yourself or frustrated. Like repetition is how children work. It's how they function. It's how they retain. It's how they remember. It's how they learn.
Yeah.
And so the reality is that we talk about patience, but I think there's so much to talk about that. And the reality is that there's so much more that goes into it when we raise our voice, when we say an
Yeah.
unkind word, when the way we talk, our body language. And the reality is that those little ones, and even as young teens, they're looking, they're watching, they're
Yeah.
observing, and they're and taking everything in.
Yeah.
And so
Yeah.
it's so crucial. It's so crucial to be very careful in how we react,
Yeah.
regardless if we know or not, Like you said,
Absolutely.
it's like a
Hmm.
condition, and you may not be able to see that someone has cancer or not, but that
Right.
doesn't give you the right to treat them any different.
Exactly. Yeah. Hmm.
We're gonna give an opportunity for our viewers live. If they have any questions, you may send your questions on the comment section. If your question may be a little bit more difficult, or would you rather call in, you may also dial 737-990-2272, and we'll feed you on the live stream to ask licensed professional counselor Nancy Soto at this time. If there are any questions, you may do so. Nancy, anything special that you would like to highlight before any other questions, or even before we finish here tonight?
I guess just add on a little bit to what you were saying, Carol. A lot. I think, and I look back. I have two girls, right? And so I feel like a lot of it is like a gentle reminder to us. Like we sometimes set a lot of expectations as parents because that's kind of like how life was for us. So we need to be aware and mindful of like whether or not they have a condition, especially if they have ADHD. Like we need to monitor and kind of reassess what expectations we're putting on them and what pressure, like, and not on a conscious level, but we're putting on them, because when we ask a lot on them, like it really can affect their self-esteem. I can't tell you the amount of times where students have come and they've said, I feel overwhelmed, I feel stressed, and then we get to the underlying reason of that, and it's like it's because I'm not getting all A's, it's because I'm not performing at my best, like at a perfect level all the time. And it's like the message has been like, well, like my parents expect nothing less than an A, when really
Mm.
like the message really is like should be like as long as you're doing your best, because your best is going to look different than it is going to look for Sally, or than it's going to look for me, when I was in school. Like it's not fair to them, and we have to kind of gently remind them like they really are doing the best that they can. And even when they're not doing the best that they can, and that they're not doing their best because you've seen their potential, that's like a learning experience for us and a way to approach them and say like, and for us to remind ourselves like all type of behavior is a form of communication. If they're not wanting to do a work, or if it might be something else, an underlying reason for them to not be performing well. But just gently remind ourselves like, hey, we're doing the best as we can as parents, but they're doing the best as they can as well as students and as our kids.
And I think to add to that, Nancy, you don't have to necessarily negative or positive you're getting from the child. That doesn't give you the right to raise your voice. You kept saying
Yeah.
the word gentle. There's a sensitive side, and we must be sensitive to them. I always
Yeah.
say that we're called to love, right, our neighbors and as ourselves. But more than that, I always think about these are God's kids. Like this is
Yeah.
God's child. Like you're not just yelling at anyone. I mean, you're
Yeah.
gonna have to take it up with God one day.
Yeah.
So I think that that's very important. And I know we say it and we hear it so much, but it's really hard to put into practice. And I've been in the
Yeah.
educational system for 8 years, and I've seen from the worst to the best. And it just breaks my heart to see that this is actually a real thing that is happening, and that adults set the tone for how that child might react, and have a lot to do with the child's self-esteem.
Yeah. Yes.
I liked what you had mentioned earlier about the identity of a child is in God, right? In Christ, who that person is, who that teenager is. I think that's important as well to highlight, regardless, if you have any mental disorder, from ADHD to, bipolar disorder, whatever it is, you're still, you're still somebody. You still your identity does not change because of that. Your identity is still the same in Christ Jesus. We have a
Right.
couple of questions from our viewers. We see here Helen Boker. Hello, Helen.
Hello.
She asks, our educational system is becoming increasingly more demanding of kids at a young age. Is it possible for kids who are not yet mature enough for school to be misdiagnosed for ADHD?
Yes, absolutely. And I think our tolerance level has gone down, especially like in the classrooms, which a lot of factors go into that, like we have an increasingly shortage of educators, which means classrooms are going to be a lot bigger, which means it's harder to kind of plan and kind of keep an eye on everybody, so that tolerance level sometimes goes down. And as opposed to, maybe taking the time to kind of invest, and like I said, all behavior is a form of communication, and like trying to figure out what might be causing for the child to behave in a certain way that could lead to that, like a diagnosis of ADHD. It's like, oh no, they're hyperactive and they automatically like have ADHD, and we kind of tend to put a label on that as opposed to kind of help the child and really try to figure out if that is a diagnosis, and if that's the case, like, well, what can I do to kind of help that child and not just leave it at that diagnosis and end it there.
Okay. Thank you for that. AJ asks, how could a ADHD, yeah, how could a ADHD, actually, that should be an, anyway, teen focus in loud or distracting environments?
Oh, very good question. And I think the first thing is, when we know we have a diagnosis, it's immediately kind of planning to have like sit down and have a meeting with all the teachers for that school year for that child, including the principal. Most of the time, especially if we're talking like public schools, some of our Adventist schools now have a school counselor, and it's just so essential to have that team and sit down and say, this child needs accommodations, because inevitably in a big classroom, or if they have to take a test, they will get distracted. So it is important to be able to kind of make provisions, like if this child needs to be sitting alone, if for a test, or if they need more individualized help, if they need a tutor and it's provided at the school, this is how we kind of help the child to be able to focus. I think it's also important, to keep in mind with teens, most of the time they won't speak up. So as parents, we need to constantly, and even as educators, we start to see like grades go down a little bit if they're struggling, if you see like they're not able to complete the work, or they're frequently like, I guess, disrupting other students, or that impulsivity kind of we start to notice it a little bit more. Is be able to teach that child, like, well, when you get distracted, what can help to kind of bring you back to the present. And again, breaking it down into maybe shorter periods of time where the child is able, or the teenager is able to complete an assignment, or just give extra time by the teacher. Like, I understand, like, it's hard to focus at school. Maybe if you take it home, that'll help you learn a little bit better. But like, I guess going around to that would be like, we need to find ways to kind of make those accommodations for each student.
That's a good point, Nancy, that you bring. But as an educator, I guess my question would be more towards: do you have to have an IEP or 504 plan to have those accommodations in place, or as someone and anyone who works with kids, can they make the call?
You don't need to have an IEP plan, but it definitely does help. But if, for
Okay.
example, if you as an educator notice that something is off, all it takes is like you being willing to kind of make those accommodations for the child. And something I like to always mention is, within, or in general, within our education system, it's set up in a way where it's like universal learning, a one size fits all. When
Okay.
we know that not all children will learn the same, we know that even the way we teach is like they might not understand it the same way.
Right.
So
That
we
is a
have to,
great observation. Yeah.
we have to keep in mind, and regardless again whether that child has ADHD or any type of like neurodevelopmental disorder, when you see that a child is struggling, you need to accommodate the classroom to that child.
Okay.
not that child to the classroom,
Mm.
because it'll help them, and trust me, it'll be so rewarding for you to know, like, I did the very best in my, I guess, and like I did the very best that I could to make sure that that child succeeded with all the struggles and all the challenges that I saw, in the classroom. So yeah.
Interesting. Interesting.
Great question. What is an IP and 404 plan? It sounds like a retirement plan to me, Pastor Diego says.
Yes, it's actually IEP and 504, and I'll let Nancy explain.
Yes. So an IEP, and yes, I know I mentioned that at the beginning, but it's important to clarify. An IEP is called an individualized education plan. Whenever there is a diagnosis, or whenever a teacher makes a recommendation or has some concerns, it's basically like a plan that details this is what we have seen in the classroom. The child is needs additional help, or struggles or challenges that you have seen in the classroom, and then this is what we can do in order to make or help that child succeed while they're here in this school. And the 504 plan is it's the same thing. It's just the IEP is what we use within our Adventist system, and the 504 plan is what it's called in the public school system. But it's in essence it's the same thing. So it's accommodating the needs for the child, but just in writing.
And that's done by an actual person who can
Counselor.
diagnose, counselor, and whatnot, right?
Yes, yes.
All right, very
It's
good.
actually done
Awesome.
by like a team of people. It's not just the psychologist or the counselor. So it's like it includes like the child's teacher, it includes the principal, it includes the psychologist, and any other expert that would be important for them to kind of voice an opinion about what accommodations need to be made for the child.
Very good.
All right. Pastor Diego asks, recently there has been a pandemic of ADHD diagnosis in childhood. What do you attribute that to? Has an entire generation gone non-diagnosed, or is there something that could be causing it? I say
That's a
TikTok
very
is causing
that's
it.
a very good question. And I can't say that there's like a concrete answer. But I will say this. Prior to like this whole talk of mental health, and becoming like, we're becoming more aware, and I think we're kind of receiving all this knowledge. I think a lot of people went undiagnosed. It is, like I mentioned at the beginning, it is one of the most common neurodevelopmental disorders. But unfortunately, there has been a lot of people who, whether it's by stigma or because we just didn't have the means or the resources to get diagnosed, they struggled, and they struggled throughout their school years. A lot of it is also, for example, like other factors. When we talk about ADHD, the majority of it can be like genetics. If somebody in the family had ADHD, chances are like those genes are passed down. It doesn't mean automatically that the ADHD is passed down through to all the offsprings and the generation. It just means like uh, you're more prone to getting those genes that could develop that ADHD. There's other various like factors that also contribute to that. So I don't know that there's a concrete answer to that.
Okay.
I
And
don't.
yeah, I think, yeah, I read what we were saying, but I also feel like we're just becoming more aware and really
Mhm.
educating ourselves on topics. And like we
Yes.
say, even being here today and talking about this is something you would
Yeah.
have not seen in a decade away. So I really
Absolutely.
think that this is just about being outspoken and really building a
Mhm.
generation that wants to see a difference and wants to see the best for the next generation. And I think it's just so many factors that play in with just
Yeah.
educating yourself.
I agree. Completely agree.
My life as Kika says we have a kiddo with ADHD and autism. IEP has been a blessing.
Yes. Yes.
Thank you for sharing. Thank you so much for sharing that. AJ asks, what are some habits that can make ADHD worse? Is there such thing? Can that?
That's a good question.
Yeah.
Yes. I don't know that I've ever thought of
TikTok
it
maybe.
as habits,
YouTube.
but I can say this. What I've
Uh
seen
huh.
a lot, especially with social media and kids who and just kids in general, right? The more access that they have to the internet, to electronics, it overstimulates their brain so much. They're developmentally not ready to be exposed to so much information all in one little screen. And so I think, and I commonly tell parents like, oh, my child is not able to sleep. And these are kids that have ADHD. My kids are not able to sleep early. They have such a like a hard time when we go through that bedtime routine. They don't want to do anything else. All they want to do is kind of be on electronics. And it's, well, they've been exposed to their brain being overstimulated more than they usually are. So if there was any bad habits, I would probably refer to it as that, although I never have looked at it that way as a bad habit.
Yeah.
But maybe it's worth kind of calling it that, you know?
Wait,
Yeah.
so could it make it worse? Does it?
Yes,
Okay.
yes,
So it
because
does attribute to it, contribute
yes,
to it.
it overstimulates the kids, so it's harder for them to focus. Because when you think about it, like the science between, like, for example, social media, TikTok was developed to be like short term, where you watch a video no more than 10 seconds. And so our mind kind of gets used to that, and we become increasingly less independent. We get distracted easily. We want to be entertained faster. And which, you know, is the whole reason why we spend so much time in social media anyway, because it's entertaining, right? And
Yeah.
so it may, I don't want to say it makes, because it's not a cause and effect, but I can see the correlation of students who already have a hard time focusing, and then we bring in like technology and social media into the mix, like become increasingly less tolerant to paying attention and being able to focus.
Are you saying that pastors should start preaching 10-second sermons?
Or 10 minutes, baby steps, baby steps.
Baby steps.
10 minutes
Baby
is fine.
steps. I like that. I like that. I think it's worth considering.
No, that's a good point, you know, because
Especially
it's true.
when there's potluck.
Right, they can't wait. Got to come with the full stomach. But going real quick back to what you were saying, Nancy, it's true, because when you think of social media, it is entertaining, and then on top of that, it's very fast, and it's on to the next topic. And sometimes has even parents, you're like, you play with 5 minutes of child, and they're probably done playing. You know, it's like they onto the next thing, and I had never put that connection with. The media is such a big influence. I mean, I would have to agree with you on that one.
Yes, yes.
My life is Kika. We're also struggling with the shortage with ADHD medication. My son's medication has been on back order since September 20th, and they do not know when they'll have some in stock. Wow, I had no idea.
Yes, this is true. This is very true. And I couldn't possibly say why there is that shortage, but I do know that it definitely is affecting a lot of kids and a lot of families. Yeah.
Wow.
Unfortunately. Live with Claudine Onsongo. Sometimes the home environment and school can trigger some of these behaviors, which may lead to misdiagnosis. How does the system support home environment assessment to ensure right treatment?
Yeah, this is true. And again, I can't tell you like the amount of times where we see behavior of for example, like the acting out, and I'm referring to like the impulse part of like ADHD, and we commonly associate that to like, oh, they must have ADHD, like there's no way, like something else is going on. But you know, we're not exempt from kids being, or like rather home environments having like different types of abuse. And we have like the emotional, the verbal, the physical. When kids have been exposed to trauma, sometimes the way they behave, and again, behavior is a form of communication, right? They can't tell you what's going on, or rather they feel like they can't trust anybody enough to talk about it. So the way they present themselves might be like, they're louder, they want to cause disruption, they don't want to do their work, but it's not because they have ADHD. It's because they have another crisis that they kind of have to tend to, and this is the way that they kind of cope with it, is to not have to think about what everything else that's going on in their lives.
Wow. Wow. Well, Nancy, this has been amazing. I mean, I've learned a lot. I hear so much about it, but you just, you know, it really makes you think like, wow, man, poor kids and adults, because there are adults that probably have it and are undiagnosed, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But this is why we're having these conversations,
Yeah.
right? To be able to help, to be able to understand, to be able to, to
Cater.
to cater, yes, to contribute to the conversation, and perhaps make an improvement, and of course with God as well. Here's one more question: can doing exercise and getting sleeping better help ADHD?
Yes, one of the common things that helps a lot, especially with ADHD, is like being able to have like a set routine. And one of the things we or doctors rather recommend a lot to include in that routine for kids is exercise, because
All
not only is
right.
it does it help them, like it helps everybody to have exercise, right, with your physical health,
Yeah.
but it gets them tired quicker. And so they're able to sleep like and have better rest, better sleep when they're tired from all the exercise that they have done. So maybe thinking about putting them in extracurricular activities or incorporating some type of exercise can give them like mental rest and physical rest too.
Oh, very good. I like that one.
Love it. Love it. Thank you so much.
Before we wrap it up, I would just like to ask you one last question to kind of finalize this whole. For those who probably have short I would do this for Pastor Diego, especially short attention. But just reading off his comment, I'm sorry. Can you say everything again? I got distracted. Just kidding. No, but in three, I guess I would like to. How would you identify ADHD if you could give me three things to look into for a child or even an adult? What would be like the top three things to look into?
The lack of inattention, like when they're not able to kind of concentrate on what they're doing, they get easily distracted.
Okay.
The impulsivity part, it's hard for them to control that impulse. A lot of people see when they start to notice these symptoms, they think that they're doing it on purpose, that they're being goofy on purpose, that they're blurting things out on purpose, but they really cannot like control that impulse part. And whereas like somebody who doesn't have ADHD, we kind of have like a mental filter of like, let me think about it and then I say it. Like for them, it's harder. Their brain is wired different. What they think is what they say, whether that's a good thing or a bad, or whether it's a good thing or a bad
Impulsiveness.
So no filter.
No filter.
Yes. So no
You have those
filter.
people who just speak without thinking, right there. Just kidding.
I'm gonna be diagnosing some people real soon.
And then thirdly,
And then third one is like the organizational skills. This is something we see a lot with adults. Like not when, for example, what I was mentioning, like we start a task and like we get distracted and we start doing like other things, and then before we know it, it's like we started multiple things and we haven't able to finish like one of those things, right? Or like
Yeah.
the lack of being able to get started. Like
oh,
we know what we need to do, but we don't know how to get started. So that often
wow.
like it prevents us from getting started in the first place, or like we put it on hold and we try to avoid doing something because we don't know how to organize ourselves to, this comes first, this comes second, and I'll do this one last. It's hard. It's hard for somebody who has ADHD to be able to do that.
All right. Thank you so much, Nancy. This has been
You're
wonderful having
welcome.
you. You are so amazing. I've learned so much and I've been blessed this evening by you.
I have. Nancy, thank you so much. We have some fun questions for you.
Yes.
Switching gears here.
Yes.
And I just want to thank as well all of our viewers for your questions. Thank you so much for contributing to the conversation. I think we'll definitely as well keep y'all in prayer. If you do have a prayer request, please put it in the comments. We would love to pray for you.
Yes.
But Nancy, here's some fun questions for you.
Okay, let's hear it.
If would you rather be able to control time or fly? What would you have said to that?
Fly.
Fly. Where would you
Yes,
fly
Yes,
to?
yes, the ability to just be free and go wherever.
Aw,
I
love
will take
it. Would you rather sell or van life around the world?
Say that again. Say it again.
Would you rather sell? Would you like to sell around the world or van life around the world?
I don't know. Yeah, sail on a
Sail.
boat.
On a
Still
boat.
sail. Yeah.
Sail.
Really?
Sail.
Yeah.
Okay,
I like
all right.
I like the water. Yeah.
Yeah. All right.
As long as you stay dry.
What is the best prank you've ever experienced or planned?
Oh my goodness. I'm really gonna have to think about that one. I can't, and not because I have so many, but because I can't think of one.
Okay.
Think
Question.
of camp, Nancy. Think of camp.
I know.
Back in your days.
Camp.
What 3 things would you do? Oh, go ahead.
Oh, go ahead. No, go ahead. It's fine.
You were like, never mind. Never mind about this one. Tell us a weird fact you happen to know for no reason.
A weird fact. Nothing comes to mind either on that one.
Or a useless fact. You know those useless facts?
Yeah. Why do raccoons stand on trash cans? I mean, not a fact. That's a question. Sorry. It's just random thoughts.
Nothing comes to mind. Sorry, guys.
Okay. What is the best advice you've ever received?
The best advice I would probably say is like, you're doing the best that you can. And I think it's something that growing up, like I didn't always like understood what that meant. Again, because the constant pressures that our families kind of build, our parents kind of have with us. But then when you get to the bottom of it, it's like, yeah, we really do wake up, and it's like, we don't know what today will look like. We don't know if it's gonna be a good day or how we're gonna feel. But if you remember, like you're doing the best that you can, like it will be a good day, and you can change that. And so that's something I try to constantly like remind my students, like, hey, you might be struggling, you might be going through a lot. It's not always gonna look like this, but remember, you're doing the best that you can.
Yeah.
I love it.
My love, you're doing the best that you can.
Aw, thanks.
You're doing the best you can. Good for you.
Thank you. I don't know if I'm going to take that one. Okay, so what would be the worst advice you've ever received?
The worst advice?
Yes. Girl, say it. Get real.
Let's see. I think for me, especially like in this field, is like mental health is like a bad thing, I used to hear that often, like, why would you, and I've actually had, and I won't say who, like out of confidentiality, but in therapy, people so far have gone to like say like, oh, you're the person who takes care of the crazy people, and it's like, no, that's terrible. Why would you say that?
Oh my goodness.
Another false fact.
Yeah.
Wait, but you're a marriage counselor as well, right?
I am. Yes.
Yeah. Yes. Okay, we're gonna talk.
Pray for me.
I didn't mean it in that way.
We'll talk later, Nancy.
All right, Nancy, thank you so much.
Yes,
Thank
thank
you.
you. This was amazing.
This has been fun.
Yes. May the Lord continue to bless you in what you do.
Thank you.
May the Lord continue to bless. Thank you so much.
You are touching so many lives. You are making a difference. You are an impact to so many people. I cannot wait till we get to heaven and we get to tell the stories. And I know your crown is going to be full of so many stars. And I can't wait to just be reunited and hear all about the stories. And many children will be in heaven because God used you and you answered his calling.
Amen.
So thank you.
Much. Thank you so much. I really appreciate
Thank you,
that.
Nancy. All right, folks. So we have come to the end of our first episode of the mental health
Season 2.
Season 2.
Let's go.
First season, first episode of season 1, season 2, of course.
Yeah.
Next week, who do we have next week?
Next week we have Dr. Alicia.
Dr. Alicia Cohen, everybody. She is a lovely member of our church, Houston West.
Who happens to sing very lovely, by the way. Maybe we should ask her to
Yes.
do a little private little song for us before the opening.
Now, the thing about next week's interview, that it is not going to be live. It's going to be recorded. Unfortunately, we have some scheduling events to do, and we're not going to be able to do it live. But it will be premiered on this YouTube channel, and it may appear live on Facebook, but it's not going to be live. So we won't have the opportunity to do questions live from the viewers, but we are going to be talking about depression.
Wow.
Dr. Alicia Cohen, she is a fellow at MD Anderson, works with children with cancer.
Wow, that was
And she told us a little bit about herself and what she does, and she educated us on what depression is about.
That's right. It's a real thing. It's happening, and we need to talk about it.
Yes, everybody. Thank you all so much for joining us.
Yes.
God bless you. And we will see you next week.